Level 1, the Giovane d'Onor, you are 14 years old, and you already know which men in your neighborhood are important. Not the policemen, not the teachers. The men who sit outside the bar on Via Roma in the morning heat, who never seem to go to work but always have new cars, whose names are spoken in a particular way by every adult in your family, with a careful lowering of the voice, a slight tightening of the jaw. Those men, your uncle introduced you last spring, not formally. He didn't sit you down and explain what he was or what they were. He simply brought you along one day. You carried packages. You delivered envelopes to addresses you weren't supposed to remember. You stood outside doors and waited without being told to. You understood instinctively that your silence was already a test. Palermo in 1990 is two cities stacked on top of each other. The visible city has churches and markets, schoolchildren, tourists at the cathedral. The invisible city runs underneath. Older than the Italian state, older than the Republic, older than anything the government built here. The invisible city has its own courts, its own taxes, its own laws. You were born into the visible city. You are being recruited into the other one. You run errands. You observe. You learn the geography of who owes what to whom. A shopkeeper who receives a man's visit in the back room and comes out with a smaller smile. A construction foreman who hands over an envelope every Thursday like it's a utility payment. A politician's driver who parks in a specific spot and waits for exactly 9 minutes. Patterns invisible to civilians are obvious to you because you've been taught what to look for. The men call you Giovane d'Onor, youth of honor. It means you are being considered. It means you are being watched in ways you cannot fully see. The attrition rate here is quiet. Boys simply stop appearing, return to ordinary lives, or redirected toward futures that don't include this. The ones who stay are the ones who ask no questions, commit no visible vices, and whose loyalty seems baked into their blood rather than chosen. Your family is proud, though no one says so directly. In your neighborhood, this association is not shame, it is status. It is the oldest form of upward mobility this island has ever offered the poor. You stay, because you were always going to stay. The alternative, a factory job, emigration to the north, a life that goes nowhere, feels like a door that was already closed before you were born. Level 2, the Picciotto. You are 19 and you have done things that cannot be undone. Your first collection came with no ceremony. A man named Enzo drove you to a bakery in the Borgo Vecchio district and waited in the car while you went inside. The baker knew what you were before you spoke. He handed you an envelope without eye contact, the way men pass documents in countries where laws are enforced by fear rather than justice. You walked back to the car with the envelope in your jacket pocket and felt the weight of it. Not the money, but what the money represented. His compliance. His calculation that paying you costs less than refusing. You have beaten 3 men, not out of anger, out of instruction. There was a businessman who stopped paying. A debtor who started performing publicly about unfair treatment, a rival from a different area who came into your territory without permission. In each case, the violence was proportional, professional, calibrated, not to kill, to communicate. Pain is the oldest language, and the message always arrived clearly. You have not killed anyone yet. This is noted by the men above you, not as praise, but as a simple ledger entry. The column is empty. But it won't stay that way. An older soldier named Carmelo takes you under his guidance the way older men have guided younger ones in this tradition for generations. He teaches you how to be invisible in your own neighborhood, how to answer questions from police, not with hostility, never with hostility, but with a perfect emptiness that gives them nothing to work with. He teaches you the names of men in other families who are allies and which names mean danger. He teaches you that respect and fear are the same currency spending in this world. He also tells you once, when you are alone, this life takes everything. Every person you love becomes a vulnerability. Every comfort becomes a target. Every year you stay, the door behind you closes a little more. He says it without regret. He says it the way men describe weather, not as a complaint, just as the condition of the environment you have chosen to enter. You file his words somewhere they won't affect your trajectory. You are 19. The door has been closing since you were 14. You stopped looking at it a long time ago. Level 3. The Soldato. It happens in a room you were not brought to blindfolded, but you might as well have been. You cannot say later, under any circumstances, exactly where it was. There are 12 men present. Men you've worked alongside for years. Men whose names you know but whose full identities you were never told. The room is ordinary to table chairs, no adornment, no drama except the kind that comes from meaning. A senior member speaks first. He explains what you are joining. Not an organization, not a criminal enterprise, a family. A tradition older than the Italian state, the oldest system of honor on this island. Then your trigger finger is pricked with a needle. A few drops of blood fall onto a card bearing the image of Saint Anna, patron of Palermo. The card is placed in your cupped hands and set alight. While it burns, you repeat the oath. As the saint burns, so will burn my soul if I ever betray Cosa Nostra. I enter alive, and I will leave only through death. The card burns down to nothing. The men embrace you. You are kissed on both cheeks. You are now a man of honor. You are now Cosa Nostra. The phrase is both a name and a declaration. Our thing. Not the mafia. That word belongs to journalists and prosecutors. To you it is simply the life. The only real structure in a country that has never fully governed this island. The thing that existed before the laws and will outlast them. What changes is invisible to the outside world. You walk the same streets. You eat at the same tables. But you are different in the way water is different from ice. Same substance, different state. When you speak in certain rooms, people listen with a specific quality of attention. When you say a man's name with a certain inflection, something happens to that man's week. You are now entitled to collect pizzo, the protection tax that every business in your territory pays the family. Not some businesses. Every business. The restaurant, the contractor, the pharmacy, the funeral home, the man selling vegetables from a cart. Each of them pays because the alternative to your protection is the thing you represent arriving with different intentions. You don't think of it as extortion. You think of it as taxation. Every government taxes. The difference between Cosa Nostra and the Italian state, in your understanding, is that Cosa Nostra delivers. Level 4. The Scarrow. The order arrives in the way all orders arrive here indirectly, through a chain that preserves deniability at every link. A Capodecina mentions a name. The name belongs to a man who has created a problem. He has spoken to someone he should not have spoken to. He has refused a directive that was not optional. He has positioned himself as an obstacle to something the family needs to continue. The problem needs to be resolved. You understand what this means without being told directly. This is the architecture of Cosa Nostra communication. Nothing explicitly stated, everything perfectly understood. The language of gesture and implication, honed across 150 years into something more precise than words. You spend 4 days watching the man. You note his patterns. The bar where he has coffee each morning at 70:45. The route he takes to his sister's house on Sunday. The gap in his day around 2 p.m. when he is briefly alone. You take no pleasure in this surveillance. This is what distinguishes Cosa Nostra from common crime. You believe. The professionalism, the absence of emotion. The way business is conducted with the same deliberate care a surgeon brings to a procedure. The day itself is unremarkable in the way that the most consequential days often are. Afterward, you drive back through Palermo in ordinary traffic, past the cathedral and the market stalls and the school children going home. The city continues. The sun continues. The man is no longer in it. But the city doesn't notice. What you carry now is different from what you carried before. Not guilt. Guilt is for people who had a choice. And in Cosa Nostra, refusal of an order is a death sentence, slower but equally certain. What you carry is weight. The specific weight of a face at a specific moment. You learn what the older men meant when they described this as something that settles into your bones and stays there. You don't visit it often. But it's in the house. The Capodecina nods at you differently now, not with more warmth, but with a different quality of recognition. You have passed through a door that has no other side. Level 5 of the Capodecina, they give you a crew. 8 men, technically. The 10 in Capodecina has always been approximate. You are responsible for them. Responsible for their earnings, their discipline, their conduct in the family's territory, and the management of their mistakes, because there are always mistakes. The men who make no mistakes are fictional. Real men create real problems. Your job is to solve them before they become visible above you. Your territory generates income through pizzo collections, construction contracts steered toward approved businesses, loan sharking operations with interest rates that compound at speeds banks would find interesting, and a slice of narcotics that officially no one in Cosa Nostra is supposed to touch. The no narcotics rule was always more mythology than practice. The Corleonesi shattered it in the 1980s, and the money was too large for anyone to remain principled indefinitely. Managing men is harder than being managed. You discover this immediately. 8 men with their own pride, their own financial pressures, their own vendettas waiting to ignite. You learn to govern through a combination of fairness and unpredictability. Consistent fairness creates loyalty. Occasional unpredictability prevents anyone from calculating too confidently that they can manage you. One of your men, a young Soldato named Pino, skims from a collection. Not much, a few 100,000 lire, probably to cover a debt he was too embarrassed to bring to you. You find out through channels that exist precisely for this kind of discovery. The question is what to do. Too lenient and you establish that theft is survivable. Too severe and you break a man over a small infraction in a way that poisons the loyalty of everyone watching. You make the calculation that has no clean answer, implement it, and live with the result. This is what command is, not the authority. The calculations that never have clean answers. The money is better now. The respect is visible. But 3 of your 8 men have been arrested in 2 years. One is serving 6 years in Uxardone prison. You visit his family the first Sunday of every month with an envelope. The family doesn't thank you. They understand that the envelope is not generosity. It is the price the organization pays for silence. The calculation runs both directions. Level 6. The Consigliere. The representative of your family calls you in one morning and says simply, "I want you beside me." This is how promotions happen here. No announcement, no ceremony. A sentence in a private room that reorganizes your entire world. The Consigliere is not a rank in the way others are ranks. It is a relationship. You are the Rappresentante's external brain, the trusted voice that speaks truth when everyone else is speaking what the boss wants to hear. This is historically the most dangerous function in Cosa Nostra. Men have been killed for their advice. Killed for advice that proved correct and threatened the ego of the man who ignored it. Killed for advice that proved wrong at the worst possible moment. You occupy the space where intelligence and proximity to power overlap, which means proximity to every violence that power attracts. You know everything now. Every asset, every liability, every secret the family carries, which politicians receive the monthly retainer that keeps certain investigations quiet, which magistrates have been approached and which are genuinely untouchable, which allied families have been speaking to the Mafia commission in Palermo and believe they've hidden it, which of your own men have wives who ask too many questions. The weight of total knowledge is different from the weight of violence. Violence is localized. Specific faces, specific moments. Total knowledge is distributed across everything. Every meal, every conversation, every night. You are the keeper of 100 secrets and the confidant of a man who trusts no one. The loneliness of this has no comparison. You cannot share what you know with your wife. You cannot share it with your men. You cannot even fully share it with the Rappresentante himself, because part of your function is knowing things he cannot officially know. Judge Falcon and his team are building cases using pentiti, men who broke the oath, who surrendered the silence, to reconstruct the entire architecture from the inside. You advise the Rappresentante that the structure must become more opaque, communication more indirect, certain operations paused. He listens. He implements some of your advice and ignores the rest. This is the position to be heard without being followed. To be right without being able to insist on it. You sleep lightly. You have slept lightly for years. Level 7. The Rappresentante. You are 47 years old when the previous done. Your mentor of 2 decades is shot 6 times outside his own home on a Tuesday morning with his grandson standing 20 meters away. The commission convenes 3 days later. Your name is put forward. There is no vote in the democratic sense. Cosa Nostra does not do democracy. There is a consensus, arrived at through private conversations among the Capodecina that produces by the end of an afternoon a single name. Yours, you are now the representative of your family. You control territory that generates 30 million euros a year. 52 soldiers are sworn to your authority. You have relationships with politicians who ensure infrastructure contracts flow in the right direction, that certain investigations die quietly in administrative procedure, that certain judges find their caseloads reorganized in ways that deprioritize your interests. You are also the most wanted man in your province. The maxi trial of the 1980s, Judge Falcon's enormous prosecution, convicted 360 mafiosi and cracked Cosa Nostra sense of invulnerability. Falcon was murdered in 1992. His colleague Borsellino 2 months later. The state's response was the most sustained anti-mafia pressure in Italian history. 4-1 bis, the prison regime that prevents incarcerated members from communicating outside, began dismantling operational continuity. Pentiti multiplied. The cupola barely functions. You are the done of a diminished thing. Not dead, but changed. The old days when a Rappresentante could attend his son's wedding with 200 guests. and be photographed shaking hands with senators. Those days are photographs in a box somewhere. You change your location regularly now. You never sleep more than 3 nights in the same place. You have not appeared in public without purpose in 4 years. The power remains. But power in this form, absolute, invisible, hunted, is a different substance than the power you imagined as a boy running envelopes through Palermo. You understand now what the men above you always knew and never said. The top of this structure is not triumph. It is the place where the weight becomes too heavy for sleep. Your predecessor was shot in front of his grandson. You think about this every morning, you adjust your movements accordingly, and continue.
Level 8. The Capo Mandamento. The commission is a fiction now, but fictions have power when enough men believe in them. You are chosen to represent your cluster of families at the reconstituted cupola, a meeting in a farmhouse outside Corleone. 14 men in a room that smells of stone and old wood, and the specific fear that comes from men who know exactly how much risk they are accumulating by existing in the same space. You speak for 4 families? Combined, over 200 soldiers, territory running from the western suburbs of Palermo to the agricultural interior, rackets spanning construction, agriculture, public contracts, and the narcotics flows that everyone publicly denies. Your word at this table carries weight proportional to your territory, your men, and the debts that other families owe you. The Corleonesi, the clan that Toto Riina built into the dominant force by killing everyone who opposed him, left Cosa Nostra half destroyed when he was finally arrested in 1993. Riina had spent 23 years as a fugitive while running the entire organization through intermediaries, living in Palermo under a false identity while the state searched for him across the world. He was found by a neighbor who noticed the same man had lived in the same apartment for too long. He never confessed. He died in prison in 2017, serving 26 life sentences. He said nothing. You carry Riina's example as both warning and instruction. Warning because his strategy of total war, assassinating judges, politicians, prosecutors, anyone who threatened, brought down the full force of the Italian government. Instruction because he operated for 23 years as the most powerful man in Sicily while remaining invisible. The lesson is not his aggression. The lesson is his discipline. At the cupola, you advocate for reduced violence, increased infiltration of legitimate business, patience over spectacle. The state hunts what it can see. What it cannot see continues. You are learning to become something the state cannot see. The cycle continues.